Today's video is a beginner-friendly watercolor tutorial for this blueberry bookmark. I personally believe that you don't have to spend a lot of money on a watercolor paint palette to be able to create beautiful pieces. The one I'm using in this video I got from Michael's. They don't seem to have the exact one anymore, but this is the closest I could find. The one thing I do find that makes the biggest difference in your watercolor painting outcome is what paper you use. I use the Arches 140-pound cold-pressed 100% cotton paper, and it's by far the best watercolor paper I've ever used. Brushes can also make a difference, but you really don't need anything fancy to start out. And if you're just starting, you really only need one brush, and that is a round brush. The one in the video I'm using is a size 10, and it's my go-to brush for basically every watercolor painting that I do. I also use a 1/2-inch oval mop brush in this tutorial, but you really don't need it. I find that it's just nicer to lay down an even background, but the size 10 round brush works for that too. In this tutorial, I use washi tape to hold down the paper, but I actually find that painter's tape works better because it doesn't lift when it gets wet, so your border remains nice and crisp. For finishing off my bookmarks, I like the look of rounded edges. I feel like it gives it a finished look, and you also have less of a chance of bending the corner when you're using it in your book, but that's just a personal choice and why I have the paper corner rounder included here. And last but not least, you will of course need a glass of water to wet your paints and to rinse your brushes, as well as a paper towel. I've also put both Canadian and US links to everything, or at least the most similar products I used, down below. To begin this tutorial, I've cut down a piece of watercolor paper to a 2" by 6" rectangle. Using my tape, I'll create an even border about 1/4 of an inch all the way around the entire piece of paper. The blue that we are going to use for the background is the same blue we are going to be using to paint the blueberries, so choose a mid-range blue on your palette for this painting. After wetting your brush, here I'm using the oval mop brush, paint a thin layer on the paper for your bookmark background. If you add your paint and it seems too dark, you can lighten it by rinsing your brush and adding more water to dilute the pigment. Keep in mind that if you decide to choose a different color for your background, watercolor paints are very thin layers, and your background color choice may slightly alter the color of your blueberries that we'll start painting next. Once you've finished painting your background, you can either leave it to dry for approximately 10 to 20 minutes, or you can use a heat gun to speed up the process like I do here. Using a light touch to make sure our paint is now dry, we can move on to painting the blueberries. Now, using our round brush, we're going to start by getting our brush wet and using the same blue that we used for our background, but this time we'll use a bit more pigment for a deeper color of the berries. Blueberries are quite simple to paint because they're really just blue circles with a highlight and a shadow to make them look spherical. To create the highlight on a blueberry, you can leave a little bit of white from the paper still showing through as you're filling in your circles. You can also rinse off your brush with some water, dry off your brush a bit, and then lightly dab the part of the circle you would like your highlight to be. This technique soaks up some of the water, which in turn removes some of the pigment. Once you've finished adding as many blueberries to your painting that you'd like, we're going to let them fully dry before moving on to the next step. This should take about 5 to 10 minutes, or again, you can use a heat gun to decrease the wait time. Just be careful not to get too close to the paper, as the water could splatter from the force of the air. The part of the blueberry we are painting next is called the calyx, which is the remnant of the base of the flower. To paint this, we'll use the tip of our brush to create small linear strokes to create a sort of star circle on each of the blueberries. Because the blueberries are so small, adding more pigment while the circles are still wet makes the pigment spread to most of the circle, which is why we've waited to add the shadows as the last step of this painting. When painting the shadows, keep in mind where your highlights are and how the shadows would be on the opposite side of them. Blend your shadow line into a gradient from dark to light by getting lighter towards your highlight. When everything has fully dried, you can peel off the tape to reveal the bordered edge. I like to round out the corners of the bookmarks to finish them off, but that's a personal choice. Sometimes I also laminate my bookmarks to protect them, so if that's something you decide you also want to do, I have the laminator I use in my links as well. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and make sure to subscribe so that we can create more arts and crafts content together.